Rohit, hi, good to have you with us. How have you been?
Hey, Ashu, good to be here. No, doing great. Yeah, couldn't be better.
Yeah. Rohit, excited to have you with us. I think, financial services space, fintech, wealth tech, right? I think all of this, right, has been, very, very, close
Yeah.
to me, right? I've been a banker in the past, right?
Right.
So I think any discussion which is around anything fintech, right? I think it's just
Right.
so much more, interesting at many levels, right? What
Sure.
we've seen possibly in the last couple of years, right? I think how we kind of survived COVID, right? I don't think
Right.
that would have been possible had we not had
Yeah.
this entire mechanics of fintech and the agility that sort of
Yeah.
fintechs bring to the
Yeah.
fore, right?
Yeah.
It's been spectacular, right? So that with that background, I think every conversation becomes very, very interesting. I think your role in that plays is just so much more interesting at many levels, right? Because for any commerce business who wants to have any layer of say a banking level integration, right? So
Yeah.
you kind of ease the way, right? You just
Yeah.
empower them so much more faster, which otherwise
Yeah.
could have been very, very bureaucratic. Right? I think that's been
Yeah.
a common complaint, right, with a country like India. So,
Right.
and we're going to discuss all of that, through the course of the conversation. But before we do that, Rohit, I'd love you to introduce yourself.
Sure.
To the many laurels that are against your name, I'd love you to talk a little about that, and then
Sure.
we dive into talk about
Sure. Sure. Absolutely, yeah. So my name is Rohit. I've been in this fintech space for almost 8 years now. Before that, I was working in Sony in Japan for 2 years.
Right.
And came back to India in 2014 to start my first fintech venture. This was called MyPoolin. Essentially a social peer-to-peer payments platform. That is what the thesis was, and that's what we actually built out. It's very similar to Venmo for those that are familiar with the US payments network. And we built out essentially like the social payments network for India in 2014. Eventually launched it in 2015 with the help of Yes Bank as our first bank partner.
Right.
And as first-time entrepreneurs, learned a lot, did a lot of mistakes as well. But yeah, very incredible journey. Scaled up the company, raised 2 rounds of funding, and then in 2017 sold the company in a decent acquisition to Wibmo. Wibmo is a 20-year-old payments infrastructure provider based out of California. Got a chance to pivot from B2C to B2B post that acquisition, and that's actually how I moved personally from Delhi to Bangalore as well, which is a great thing in hindsight. Love Bangalore. I think that was an amazing personal and professional transition that happened.
Right.
And then in 2019, PayU came along. PayU, as you all know, is a multinational payments gateway. They came along on an acquisition spree, as they have been over the last few years, and they acquired the entire group in 2019. So my role remained the same. I was essentially the director of payments. So I was handling the entire engineering and the product team, both for Wibmo and PayU, post-acquisition. And I got a chance to work with Anirban, who is the CEO, current CEO of PayU, to help in the expansion across India and Southeast Asia.
Right.
I think that was till 2020. And I think one of the things that stayed really constant across my entrepreneurial journey as well as this corporate journey is just how painful banking integrations can be. Right? So that never changed, irrespective of whether you're a large organization like PayU or whether you're a small startup like MyPool. So it was very surprising for me, and then I decided that banks are not solving this problem, so somebody else has to solve this problem. Hence, I jumped into the space, and that's how Decentro came into me. Yeah.
Super. Rohit, I was recently at a bank branch, right? And this was in a tier 2 school.
Yeah.
And trust you me, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Right? There's a moment of realization, right? And it kind of hits me, right? That while in urban areas we continue to talk of I think more so the startup business, right? Because we have glued on to just so much of development which is happening, right? When you go back to all of this, it just hits you as a revelation that we've not even possibly moved an inch, right? There's just so much more ground to cover.
Yeah.
It's not even a joke, right? It's that it's so the depth and the width that we have as a country.
Yeah.
It's just so large, right? I think there's just so much more to be done, right? We're going to be talking about Decentro, right? Now, you're essentially aggregating pretty much all of the API ecosystem which is available by banks, and possibly also helping in the process to do it better, right? And then you're kind of empowering many businesses that are getting created in the past, right? Would love to understand the nuances of this game that you kind of built in.
Sure.
What are some of the missing elements, right, in the process?
Sure.
for example, and some of the challenges as well, right? For a business, right? Because homogeneity possibly could be one, right? Because there are, every institution is working in a different environment, right? For a business to identify one and then plug it into it, the hygiene becomes just so much more complicated, right? And you don't want to go wrong in a payment play,
right?
Because it results into trust deficit, right, with the consumer, and that's a very complicated question, right? Why don't you tell us a little more about construct?
Sure, absolutely. No, I think you're right, absolutely. I think there's a lot of pain points that companies have, right, when they are entering the whole fintech area, right? So I think let's take an example of a marketplace. So we work with a bunch of marketplaces, right? Both B2C marketplaces as well as B2B marketplaces. B2B is our strong point. So now, if you look at a B2B marketplace, right, company like, for example, just to give you a name, Jumbotic, they're one of our customers as well. Now, companies like these, or any B2B marketplace, is typically solving the problem between retailer and a distributor, right? Or basically the fag end of the problem, which is not really visible, right, to a consumer as well. So there's a lot of innovation that they want to do at the back end in terms of inventory management, in terms of sourcing this, managing the entire cost system as well for them. Billing, as well. So when they actually want to do that, they eventually realize that at some point of time, they have to integrate with the bank, right? If, for example, they want to get visibility into the bank statements or enable money flow or those kind of things, right? And that's where the problem starts, right? So when these companies actually go to a bank, the bank's first 3-4 months just go in discussion and talking, where they're just discussing the use case, they're just discussing the compliance bit of it, right? What all InfoSec clearances are required. InfoSec is basically information security in banking parlance, right? What all clearances are required, what are the commercials that will be, right? All those kind of things, which is ridiculous. I mean, 3-4 months are just gone by without even realizing. And this is a repeatable cycle, by the way. Like every new company has to go through it, right? Because every new company will have a use case. The second problem that happens is once you say survive those 3-4 months, then ultimately you have to go through the arduous development of those APIs. Ultimately, you have to integrate the bank APIs. And I kid you not, I mean, the APIs are like documentations of these APIs are non-existent, right? The APIs are existent, sure, but the documentation is non-existent. So what ends up happening is you have to find out somebody in the branch, in some remote branch of the bank, so maybe they have a tech center in Ahmedabad or Bombay or whatever. You will have to coordinate with that person, get the latest PDF, right, which will be literally a PDF. It won't be, a fully digital portal. And then that PDF will have some loopholes, some errors. You'll have to go back and forth. So after another 3-4 months, you'll finally go live. So basically 6-8 months go by just in integrating a basic, vanilla API. And even then, you're not 100% confident because what might happen is the bank might change the API at some point in time. Or there might be some iteration, and then you have to integrate it all over again or do some changes. So it's like a full-fledged in-house department that you have to set up, in order to do this, which has been the problem over the last 5 to 10 years, right? Except now, which is companies like us and other companies which are solving this.
Interesting. Now, Rohit, possibly this question would have come a little later, right? But I think I'm kind of itching to ask you, right? Now, when you talk about what you're doing, right? Now, I mean, I think today's paradigm is considered to be hack first, right? In many ways, and especially when you're doing it on B2B environment, your ability to price a certain service is just super limited, right? Everyone's cost of doing business, right? And I think my profitability is a function of how much it has squeezed out from my pocket, right? Now, while there are challenges that are there, right? I think this is not necessarily a cost that you want to, build into your basic models, right? There's just very limited possibility of passing on some of these costs to your consumers, right? Further on. And that makes it very, very challenging for you, right? So while you're in that game where I think it's just so much more critical, right? I think from an upside standpoint, the ability to price, right, is just so much more limited. Right? I would love to understand, how is that playing out in your case, right? Is there a premium that you can build into your services, or you have to sort of maintain that hygiene? And understand that survival for your customer or client is just so much more critical, right? I mean, and that's a longer term call that you do. I'd love to understand your your thesis process.
Sure, absolutely. I think for sure we have to think a lot about pricing. And the pricing is also very subjective, by the way. It varies a lot. Like it's not a standard SaaS pricing, right? It varies drastically based on your volumes. There are scenarios where we're given products at 5%, 10% margin as well. And then there are products which have 100% margin as well. So both scenarios exist, and obviously there's a blended margin that comes around, in the industry, and different companies have different, benchmarks on that. I think in our case, the key thing that we look out for is this product that we are selling to them, is this a cost center for them, or is this a revenue generator for them? If you look at our first set of products, which is the payments and the KYC, right? Those are cost centers for the companies, right? And there it makes sense to be really competitive with pricing, because ultimately that company is probably spending money on this, and they're not able to recover it from the consumer. However, the promise lies, and this is where the long landscape, the larger long-term view comes in, right? Both from our perspective and our customers' perspective, is eventually all these companies will transition to making money, right? So first you solve for the basic problem, right? Just like any fintech company, you solve for the commodity basic problem like payments, right? Then you look at monetization. And that's where phase 2 comes in, which is our new products, right? Like card issuance, account issuance, loan issuance, like BNPL, for example, right? Now, there it becomes significantly easier for us to monetize, right? Yeah. Why there's some disturbance, some construction is going on. Yeah. That's what you want. Okay, cool. Yeah. So, so that's phase 2, right? And there the margins are significantly higher. We're able to monetize because it's a revenue for the company as well, right? So that is where the margins become, say, like 100%, 80% as well, in terms of gross margin.
Right. I have particular questions, right, from the lending ecosystem, some of the things that you do, right? And I think lending becomes, in a conversation like this, lending becomes important because, today, lending companies largely become marketplace, because, at the back, everybody has a marketplace model, right? That all of these financial institutions start at the company and kind of thinking how to stay with it. So I'm going to talk about that model in just a bit, right? So what I want to talk about is a competitive landscape, right? Competition is something which is, this is a space which just needs some action, right? There are a bunch of players who come in, right? There are some who are solving for, say, 1 or 2 problems. There are some who are solving for, say, a more bigger catalog, right? Have to sort of offer. In any case, this is, and then of course there are a lot of resellers, like players who kind of who are doing what they're doing, right? Now this is getting very fragmented, right? In that scheme of things, right? Now, what's your sense of it? Do you think this is a model which largely will continue to be on? And I'm actually looking at how are you thinking about future forward, right? And how you possibly make your company ready, right? Or do you believe this is something where largely all of core banking operations, right? Or not? I'm saying that the tech level, will largely come to you. And most of the fintech, right, across the spaces will continue to largely be, an client acquisition engine, right? Where, you with, say, your banking stack, right, and layers of newer product additions, right, which possibly happen within your own system, can then offer a very tightly bagged stack of services, right? So that you don't have to out, right? So do you think that's an evolution in role that you see for yourself? How are you thinking on that front? Given that many players are coming in, and the pricing, like you said, right? I mean, there are those windows that you have, but it's all getting commoditized very, very. Absolutely. How are you thinking about it?
Right. Absolutely. No, you're right. I think more than the competition for sure is something which we think about. But I think more than the competition, we think about, where is the next 5 years going to be, right? Where are these companies headed, right? Where are these neobanks headed? Where are these BNPL players headed, right? What do they do? That's what really guides us in terms of decision making, more than the competition, I think the better way to look at it, and you also hinted on that, is ultimately going upstream, right? So there are 2 parts of going upstream which we are doing. One is, which I shared, going from phase 1 to phase 2, where the products which were earlier cost centers, right, now transition into becoming revenue generators for the company, right? And this is something which we're going very aggressive on. Like, we are really bullish on enabling custom BNPL as a solution, for example. And I think India has just scratched the surface when it comes to BNPL. Right? I mean, you look at the US, it's everywhere, right? People don't know the scale at which you can operate when it comes to BNPL. So I think that's a majority, and it will be a sine wave. Like there will be a boom and a bust cycle as well, which might happen, but eventually it will stabilize. That's one example. Similarly, just the aspect of giving these prepaid cards or corporate cards, for example, right? This is again a very high revenue generating activity for companies because they're able to earn interchange on every transaction. So that's another one. And then there's a long-term, thesis that's coming out, which is a lot of these payment solutions that India has, right? Like IMPS, UPI.
Sure.
You'll notice two things. One is many of these are getting adopted internationally. I think you might have heard of countries in Southeast Asia, right? Taking inspiration from UPI and trying to build UPI, right? So that's really powerful, right? Which gives you a hint of that, yes, we will look at those countries as well at some point, right? And at the same time, I think UPI going cross-border is a reality. Like will happen at some point. So imagine that the way I can send money to you domestically, I can send money the same way to somebody in Dubai, right? Really powerful, really valuable, right? And we would love to play there whenever it happens. So I think these are a few areas which are yet to be unlocked. Right? They are like, we're just at the surface of these areas right now. And when they happen, obviously the competition will also be there. But at the same time, these are the areas where margins are significantly higher. Right? And we don't need to worry about the commoditized business, which is domestic payments right now. And then there's an upstream of going into higher scale, like banks and enterprises, right? So we don't sell to banks yet. We have just started looking at them. Till now, we've been just focused on fintechs. And fintechs will continue to be a good part of our journey. However, a lot of these large enterprises, marketplaces, like the older e-commerce companies, for example, like the Flipkarts of the world, and those are the ones which are now becoming very interesting. And many of them are in talks with us at this.
Interesting. Rohit, would love you to shed some light. I mean, this was clearly not part of the script, right?
Sure.
I'd love to understand when you say, for example, Flipkart is becoming, right? What does that mean? Right? If you could, of course, give us a limited exposure. But I'd love you.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll give you a very high-level generic one, right, as an example of what these companies are looking at. So a lot of these B2C commerce companies, right, which also includes your B2C aggregators like Zomato, Swiggy, and the likes, right? These guys are looking at BNPL very actively. A couple of them have already introduced BNPLs of their own, but the remaining are yet to do that. That's one area. That's something which is going to come in. The second one is many of these companies were built out at a time when banking APIs were not that prominent, right? So a lot of their internal systems are also not that well developed. So, for example, if I'm a food aggregator, I also have to settle money to my suppliers, or my restaurants, for example, or any third party. Now that entire reconciliation engine, like how much money to go there, how much money do I take, what is my commission, right? What's my tax, etc., all that stuff. So a lot of this back-end accounting is broken. Like most of it is happening manual, or maybe on a dashboard or Zoho or something, which is not the ideal way of doing it. Ideally, that thing should be in sync with your real-time transactions. Right? It should be real-time driven. Right? The money comes in automatically; it gets reconciled, in the backend, rather than you doing a post-factum analysis. That's another area which is becoming of high interest of the companies like Flipkart, Walmart, and the likes. In the Indian ecosystem.
Very interesting. Right. There's this category, right? And that category is that of these players which are essentially NBFCs, right? But now basically they are positioning themselves as a tech-enabled or a tech-enabled infrastructure company, right? Within NBFC on the side, right? So they become your capital partners in the process, right? There are a couple of them, right? We've seen some of them raise capital as well. A couple of them are possibly listed in that environment as well, right? And they're doing phenomenally well, right? Now, when you talk of some of these legacy players, right? Now, because these NBFCs have, say, for example, an underwriting model, and they've been lending themselves, they have a very clear, say, playbook as far as that is concerned, and then they have this relationship with the banks of a very different nature and kind and all that, right? A lot of these guys are getting into the same environment, right? BNPL continues to be a priority for them. lending overall continues to be a priority for them. They are getting into a play where they want to sort of start doing accounting play as well, right? Now, I see that as a far more significant competition to you vis-a-vis some of your, say, very visible competitors, right? Who are essentially doing an aggregation. How do you see this, Rohit? Is there? I mean, are you tempted to play that game yourself, where you have, some of those, NBFC like, say, a muscle aligned with you within your organization? What's your thesis there? Right. Because that's for some of these guys, it's becoming like a default mechanic, right? What's your thought on that?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right. I think this definitely is something which we look out for. But at the same time, we don't really want to become an NBFC. I mean, that's not really I think it's a very different, ball game in the sense that your focus and priority changes from, tech to fin, right? It's more fin than tech, right? And you're always looking at, just top line, bottom line. That's ultimately what you really worry about. So that's one. But yes, we do partner with NBFCs. That is for sure. Just like we partner with banks, we partner with NBFCs. We already do that right now. Few integrations are already live at scale as well. So that will continue to happen. So we'll, of course, happy to add as many NBFCs as possible in the future. The ones which are really forward-looking and the ones which are really believe in this, fintech environment. And that will continue to happen, both in terms of, us being a TSP, which is what we do, this tech arm to them, them dispersing capital, or them using us as a solution provider, for their own digitization, which could be KYC, which could be disbursement, for instance. I think the key thing which becomes, and this is something which I'm sure the NBFC would be thinking about, like, so if an NBFC really becomes a fintech infra provider like us, on its own, the challenge that they have is, one, every company that comes in, will essentially get locked in with that particular NBFC, which is not really ideal, right? You ideally want the customer to have the choice.
Many of them, absolutely.
Exactly, that's one slight disadvantage, which that company will have. And second, you will always have a preferential treatment, right, of your NBFC versus other NBFCs, right? So all those scenarios, like basically the question of your interests, right, where are they aligned, that comes into play, which is what we have seen in the current environment as well. So that's the reason why we don't want to own an NBFC ourselves. We would rather let the NBFC be external.
Interesting, Rohit. I think that particular point requires us to have a different session altogether, because I think the behavioral tendencies are changing, right? I think while there are there are these companies at the intersection of, right, being an NBFC or being a marketplace, and being a tech there. I think this is something which is becoming very, very interesting at many levels, right? Now, Rohit, the other point that you kind of highlight, right, is that of BNPL, right? Now, I mean, I understand, when you talk about the growth of BNPL in, say, markets like, say, for example, US, right, or connected markets, if I can put it that way, right? I think it's very, very different. Right? I mean, you have traceability, you have, very, very continuous connected systems, right? Elements of leakage, for example, are much lesser, right? And there is this, visibility across, say, the consumer, right? His or her, for example, performance indicators, scores, employment. You have like a complete thesis history, right? Which essentially is very easily from an underwriting standpoint, right? Right, and thus a BNPL-like system or lending in general is slightly more easier, right? And has picked up that, right? But when you talk of a marketplace, right, which is operating at many layers, heterogeneous, language to, employment again is a big concern, right? Macroeconomic indicators are not necessarily as aligned, right? I mean, I'll concede, right, that we're like a large billion people market, right? That is, right? But when you look at per capita incomes, growth in per capita, rate of savings, for example, all of these indicators have not necessarily been doing very, very good last year. True. Right. So when you talk of BNPL, which I'm assuming is also a very large opportunity, but I think everybody's going to look in some way or the other. We might have cuts and bruises before we get to a point of that light at the end. And the overall macroeconomic conditions don't necessarily seem to be very conducive. what's your sense of it? How are you looking at it? Right? While it's a great opportunity, no doubt about it, but I think the beautiful tendencies will take time to set it.
Right.
What's your sense of how you look?
Right. Absolutely. No, for sure. I think there's no denying the fact, right? I think every new tech will always have its, some casualties along the way, right? When it's casualties, companies, not doing well, companies going out of business, and then eventually, new companies coming in. Unfortunate, but yes, that's how it happens. And it is across the world, right? So you look at, for example, blockchain, right? It's a technology that has seen its own fair share of, sinusoidal waves, and still continues to see so. Same thing will happen. It's a new concept for India, right? A lot of the Indians are still getting used to it. Not able to understand, right, how to leverage it in a good way. But I think it's just a matter of time, right? It's just a matter of time for, especially the urban audience, right? People who are really savvy in terms of credit cards will realize what it is and how it can be leveraged, despite them having credit cards. And then there's, of course, this whole new audience, right, which is completely new to credit, right, which has never seen credit in their life. For them, it's really a boon, right? You are able to get 10K, 20K, worth of balances from a BNPL app at the click of a button. And of course, that is where the regulator is trying to contain it so that it does not grow out of proportion as well, right? So for sure, regulatory oversight is required, but at the same time, I think it's for the better, that eventually it happens, and there's no stopping it, by the way. So it will happen whether it happens from method A or method B, right? So it's just a matter of time which one gets taken.
Interesting. I think another interesting point for our next conversation. Rohit, I think, like I said at the outset of the conversation, there's been no other sector which has been so interesting, right? The way it's played out. People continue to question, right? How is this going to kind of eventually, how will the contours of this industry look like, right? And people continue to question, right? What is fintech and all of that, right? But I think the way it's kind of playing out, and I think your role continues to as that, as a player which is empowering many of these, front-ending brands, right? I think it's becoming just so much more critical in the process, right? What are the next 2.5 years like? Right? What are the targets that you've set for yourself? And
sure, absolutely, yeah. I think for sure, I think no doubt about that. It's a new industry. It's an industry which people have not seen earlier, right? So definitely a lot of people are speculating what will happen, right? So that's bound to happen. I think the best thing is the market is growing by the day, right? So it's not just your fintechs, it's also, as I mentioned, right, these older companies, right, which are trying to embrace fintech. And I think that's really happening now, right? So I think that way your market is really immense, right? It's not a small market. So that's one. The second thing which will continue to happen is India will continue to adopt a lot of these new models, right? When I say new models, these are new models of, for example, trade finance, right? New models of B2B financing, right? For example, BNPL in B2B was non-existent. Non-existent, like digital BNPL did not used to happen. It was purely offline, khata-based, right? The retailer will have a khata with the distributor, right? So these older nuances, the method of businesses that have existed over the last 10 years, 20 years, right? They are getting digital, right? They are basically becoming this new method of financing, new method of payments, right, etc. And that's actually where the majority of opportunity lies, right? And that's where I really see these, next 2-3 years going to be. From a target perspective, I think specifically for us, one key thing which is, as I said, right, the phase 2, which is enabling companies to monetize from fintech. Because companies have not been able to monetize for a long time. I think that's going to be really critical. So that's one we are going deep on. So enabling these financing solutions, right, or any solution which essentially helps the company generate more revenue from day one. That's one. The second thing which we are very keenly observing and evaluating in the long term is how does this whole international remittance, cross-border remittance, right, play out? And not just from India to outside, but also internally, like inbound. So I think that's an area which, again, as I mentioned, right, is relatively underserved. It's extremely complex as well, right? But that's where the opportunity lies as well. So I think these are two key areas that we have set for ourselves, like, in terms of acquisition. Apart from that, of course, we have a bunch of our targets in terms of how many customers, and those things. Yeah, those are always there.
Personally, I think I'm kind of saving some of this for our next conversation, like I said.
Sure. Right.
But no, I think you're absolutely right. Right. I'd love to see how BNPL for example, for B2B, the B2B environment kind of plays out. Right. There are a couple of people who are trying to do that, right? Even in the embedded finance space, right? I mean, I think there's been a bunch of stuff which is kind of happened, right? But I think it's important to sort of just watch out for how it shapes up, right? Because when you talk about B2B environment, right, I think the kind of trade deficits that you have and the kind of inconsistency that you have, for example, in the accounting patterns and kind of the way leakages are and for example, how cash adjustments, for example, happen, right? And now I think all of that is very, very complicated. In fact, in a recent conversation, I was with a very dear friend who's a restaurateur, right? So he had a fintech company which was pitching to him, right? Trade related solutions, right? And his point was that I have this supplier who's in any case default setting 0 cost. He's absorbing my I have a credit, like a friend setting, right? Right? No questions asked. Will you be able to offer that, right? And surprisingly, that there was no very clear answer, right, on that. Right. Now, what I'm alluding to is that cost of doing business, right? I mean, cost of institutionalization is increasing. The cost of doing business, right? And I think adoption of that, at least in the SME and MSME sort of setting, will continue to be a question mark. Right? I think it will be interesting to sort of see how some of this plays out, right? Something that you mentioned on international remittances, I think again very, very interesting, right? How does the government look at it? I think it will be very interesting to watch out for that, because that's not a space they want to lose their visibility on, right? I think. I think for a variety of reasons, right? And I think we keep ourselves to not talking about some of that, right? That's good. This has been an absolutely spectacular conversation. My parting question, right? Very cliched, but I think important. Every founder has a very unique journey and an interesting journey, and not necessarily an easy journey, right? It requires for a lot of patience, persistence, perseverance, right? And there are definitive lessons, that one can share, give out, advice, however you want to call it, right? What is yours? I mean, you've built something, you successfully exited, right? You've taken up another fight, you're kind of, solving for a very interesting market, but you're still dealing with a lot of, say, for example, bureaucracy when it comes to and you know what I mean, right? We are slow paced, right? We're very different. Anything that you would want to, you think can help fellow entrepreneurs, who are solving for an equally exciting market, but have stakeholders who are not necessarily as aligned, right? What would that be?
Right. Absolutely. No, for sure. I think there are multiple industries like that, right? I mean, you have the healthcare industry, right? You have the people are trying to do what we are doing in the insurance industry, right? I think that's probably 10x harder, right? I mean, the insurance industry is even behind banking in many ways. So for sure, I think definitely more power to those guys. So somebody has to pick up the and somebody has to solve it. I think the advice that I would really give here is don't get swayed by few months or few quarters, right? And because turbulence in any industry, especially this one, which is also regulated, right, or touches money in any way, is fairly common, right? There will be new regulations, there will be new changes. The banks will also try to compete with you as well at some point in time, right? So I think don't get swayed by those few months. Think in terms of a decade, right? That do you see the thing that is happening now, right, continuing over the next 10 years? Mostly what ends up happening is it's a very short-term thing, like whatever short-term impact. For example, a new circular comes in, right, or a new competition comes in. It may not be as relevant in the next 5 or 10 years, right? Or you would have found a better way of doing it, right, because of that. So I think that's the thing which a lot of people lose focus on, and they get swayed by short-term things. It's sometimes human tendency as well. It's really hard to think long, really hard, to think in 10 years. So I think, that's the ability that really sets, an entrepreneur apart.
I think that's the muscle that they should build, right? This is essentially what
exactly.
you're doing. Rohit, this is an absolutely phenomenal, spectacular conversation. Thank you so much for doing this, right? Loved every bit of it, right? And like I said, right, I made my notes, and there are many questions that I have.
Sure.
As soon as we come back together next time, right? Because there are some of these, like we said, right? International payments.
Yep. A lot of areas, absolutely. Yep.
B2B, for example, the transactional, possibilities which can exist.
Yep.
I think all of this is kind of becoming very, very interesting, very large, right? And possibly far more exciting than what we've been seeing, right? And of course, problem for adoption, right? Which continues to be the biggest, right?
Right.
I think, like I said, right, this has been an absolutely phenomenal conversation. I made these notes, and I'm looking forward to another one much sooner.
Sure.
Thank you for doing this. Thanks.
Thanks, Arash. My pleasure. Great chatting with you.